Well, Firefly, I looked over a lot of your videos, looked through some of your questions that you asked, tough questions for Christians. I didn't find them very tough. I'll get to that in a little while. I thought those were interesting things for an atheist to bring into questions. A couple things I wanted to note about your arguments concerning faith. Your little pie graph that you had, you said that Christianity has a 0.002% chance of being right, and I had to wonder to myself, why are you wasting your breath on something that has 0.002% chance of being right? Makes an interesting question, doesn't it? But other than that, there's actually a fatal flaw with your thinking in terms of that 0.002%. This fatal flaw actually, and a fatal assumption, actually has an understanding of faith that that impacts exactly how you interpret all these things. Faith, according to Christ in the New Testament, is not concerned with content of information. Faith is about trust, not believing a fact. In other words, faith is not concerned with, do you think the sky is blue or do you think the sky is red? That's not a faith question, that's an information question. A faith question for Christ in the New Testament would be, do you believe me and are you willing to trust me? Are you willing to trust me, not in terms of believe the content of what I am saying, but are you willing to cast yourself upon me? Are you willing to follow me? And those are two very different things, two very different understandings of faith. Now, it's very common, especially in our day and age, to understand faith in terms of content of information. This would, of course, come right out of a scientific, rationalist approach to information and faith, as if God is wanting us to believe a certain thing about heaven, hell, life, or death. That's quite not, frankly, what's going on in the New Testament. When they talk about faith, it is the question of the existence of deities that are higher than the people who are running around in the New Testament world is never taken, never doubted. It is simply taken for granted. But that faith doesn't translate into what Paul would consider saving faith. Second, this concept of faith impacts your understanding of the odds. You intentionally divided up the Christian faith into a myriad of denominations precisely because it promoted your agenda of decreasing the odds of faith. In other words, if you had left Christianity as one of the major religions and let Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam remain in there, the odds would have dramatically increased. But because your concept of faith is that we have to get it right, what it did is you only had 0.002% chance of being right because there's so many vastly different understandings. But if you understand faith to be something other than concerned with facts or figures or anything like that, you would come up with a vastly different understanding. Finally, the way you understand faith impacts the way you understand hell. Very clearly in the Scriptures, it is God who judges, and it is God who judges all of humanity, including myself. I'm going to be judged by God. I am not exempt from God's standards. While the Bible provides an interesting list of do's and don'ts, it is very clear that what you want to do is paint it as if it is more black and white than it actually is. This is a pretty common understanding of Christianity on a very common level, because what it applies is a desire for consistency and knowledge about who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. But there's one thing in the New Testament that Christ very clearly paints is the surprise of acceptance. On Judgment Day, we will be surprised as to who is in and who is not. It is God who judges, and it's not me, the Scriptures, or you. God is the ultimate judge, and He has His standards, and He has certainly revealed enough of them to know the direction that we ought to be living. So to answer to your question, would I look your daughter or a little girl in the eyes and say that her relative is burning in hell? Honestly, no, I wouldn't, and nor should a normal Christian do that, because we don't know what happens in a person's life. We don't know how God will judge ultimately. We are given hints, we are given directions, we are certainly provide a compass towards where we should be living. But it is not as clear-cut as you want to paint it. You want to paint this thing into a black and white thing, as if there's no ambiguity, as if there's no fogginess. This issue of hell for you is huge, and it plays a huge role. A different way of looking at it might change the way you understand what is going on. Hell is not necessarily understood as punishment, although it's talked about that in language in the New Testament. It could also be understood as a consequence, the result of a life that is lived without God. What I mean by that is if you understand from the Christian perspective that God is the source of all love, kindness, goodness, joy, perhaps the ability for us to accept that life, the ability to accept that love and that joy is predicated upon our ability to accept those things into our lives now. In other words, it becomes a natural consequence of rejection of God. C.S. Lewis talked about this in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, all the way through to the last battle, the Chronicles of Narnia. He talked about this type of faith, understanding heaven and hell a little differently, more like a consequence as opposed to a punishment. So it's just something to think about. I've got other illustrations. I wanted to talk about Gog and Magog.